Chapter 97, Medication. When Xie walked in, he didn't expect Lucien to be here at this moment, but after thinking about it, Zhang Xuning didn't know him, so he didn't say much. Hearing Lucien say this, he was silent for a moment, frowned, and said, "A little girl from the Zhang family, what nonsense are you talking about?" Of course, Lucien still remembered Zhang Xuning. This second girl Zhang was taken by Yan Shizi in the past, came to his house to buy a piano, and took away the jian. Xie was secretly dissatisfied for a while. But is he talking about a little girl or not a little girl? I have known Xie for so many years, and there is not even a girl in this house. Xie Juan is devoted to the study of the Buddha, pure heart, and few desires, not close to women, not even raising any cats, dogs, birds. I am afraid that the rats who make holes in the wall can catch a few females up and down this huge mansion. Take a girl back home, it's like the sun is coming out in the west. Lucien's eyes fell on Zhang Xuning, but he saw that this girl was more prominent than the last time she saw her, with a slender waist, a delicate figure, and black and white eyes, which were extremely clear, but because of the peach petal-like eye shape, there was a little more natural charm with a delicate state. In terms of facial features and aura, this is really not a dignified face. It's only nearly 19 years now, and it's not even a double 10, and it's already like this, so what if you have to grow up a little longer? He always felt an indescribable strangeness in his heart. The piano hall is not a place that anyone can enter. But after all, it is in front of outsiders, and the little girls at this age are all smart. Lucien didn't say anything more, forcibly picked up his chin that fell to the ground, and arched his hand to Zhang Xuning with an apologetic look, and said, "Please forgive Lu Mao's clumsiness, I was so surprised that I didn't recognize it. It turned out to be the second girl in Zhang Shilang's house. Is it okay to use that Jiaoan last time?" God knows that Zhang Xuning almost didn't scare his soul when he saw Lucien. Others don't know the relationship between Lucien and Xie, but she knows. At that moment, she almost showed a flaw, but fortunately, Lucien was very surprised to see her. Xie's attention was on Lucien again, and he didn't pay attention to her, which gave her a chance to breathe, and she immediately adjusted and covered it up. Hearing Lucien ask about Jian, Zhang Xuning calmed down and replied, "Thank you Boss Lu for helping Zhang Luo find the qin. The qin is a guqin, which is naturally excellent. Boss Lu is also here with Mr. Xie, is he sending the qin?" Lucien was stunned for a moment, and immediately laughed. Yes, there is news of a good piano recently, but the master's family seems to be reluctant to come out. After all, it is entrusted by Juan, so I came to discuss. This is a donkey down the slope, and he has no suspicion of Zhang Xuning. Zhang Xuning judged from the words he called Xie that the relationship between the two was indeed very close, but there was nothing to say here. Xie turned to her and said, "Stretch out your hand." Zhang Xuning was confused, inexplicably felt a little creepy, and stretched out her left hand. Xie's long eyebrows frowned, and he actually lifted her sleeve to look. The snow-white arms were clean and there were no scars. He added, "The other one." At this time, Zhang Xuning vaguely sensed something. Her right hand hung down at her side, and she didn't want to stretch it out. Xie's eyes seemed to flash with some anger. But he still pressed down on her and didn't have a seizure. With a slight lowering of his eyebrows, he leaned forward slightly, and stopped talking nonsense with her, grabbed her right hand, which he did not dare to stretch out, rolled up the layers of sleeves, and saw the bloody scratch on her wrist. Zhang Xuning's scalp was numb. It's all just accidentally. Xie let go of her hand, pointed to a chair next to her, and said, "Sit." Zhang Xuning couldn't keep up with this person's thoughts, or she couldn't figure out this person's thoughts at all. She blinked a little blankly, but saw that Lucien was beside her, looking at her more and more strangely, as if looking at a three-legged rabbit and a turtle with horns, which was very strange. She was full of doubts, but she didn't dare to speak. Siawei asked her to sit, and she had no choice but to sit nervously. The piano hall is where Siawei often stays, and on the long table by the window there are still wood and rope ink for the chain, and even discarded strings are placed in a circle in the corner. The box containing the ointment rests on a ledge not far from the long table. Siawei walked over and took it, a small bottle of wine and a small jar of ointment, folded a clean and snow-white brocade hand, dipped it in some wine, came to her, and asked her to stretch out his hand. Zhang Xuning was a little stunned. After all, she and Mr. Xie didn't seem to have spoken superfluously for a long time, and the other party suddenly came to take care of her and gave her medicine, which really made her feel flattered like in a dream. Of course, it is still more surprised. She held out her hand in a daze. The wine-stained jimpsa pressed against the wound on her wrist, and she didn't feel anything for the first moment, but after 2 breaths, the wound that had broken the skin seeped into the burning pain. It wasn't until this time that Zhang Xuning realized that he had reacted. It's wine. The little girl's fine skin and tender flesh could not bear the suffering, tears came out of her eyes under the pain. She suddenly got up, pulled her hand back and covered it, retreated away from Siawei, and even had some aggrieved anger. What are you doing? A heavy bag fell out of her sleeve and fell to the ground. Siawei was still pinching the fang jimpsa, and frowned for a while. It would be more painful to clean the wound with wine, but at this point, it would take such a big reaction? Puff. Lucien, who was snorting melon seeds not far away, looked at this situation and laughed directly without paying attention. Siawei bent down and picked up the bag on the ground, heard this voice, turned his head and saw him. His eyebrows were suddenly stained with a little frost. It was colder, and he said lightly, "Why are you still here?" Lucien stuck a melon seed in his throat and almost choked to death. He was speechless for a long time, smiled slightly, and said in his heart, "Then I'll go out now." A handful of fried melon seeds were thrown on the table, and he got up gracefully, and said with a slight smile, "I'll wait outside, don't bother." Lucien Zhen went out. Zhang Xuning still stood, looking at Siawei vigilantly, and her tears couldn't force her back. After all, it really hurt. Siawei checked the bag, and when it fell, he spilled a few of them, and at a glance he could see that they were peeled pine nuts, and he couldn't help but look at her and said, "I still bring these things with me to the crown ceremony." Zhang Xuning glared at him and didn't speak. Siawei first put the small bag of pine nuts on the desk, his eyes flashed slightly, and said, "That should be given to you by Yan Linear." At the mention of the young man, Zhang Xuning fell silent. Siawei's heart didn't seem to feel good, and he didn't speak for a while before he called her, "Come here. Can't you stand this little pain? Your ancestor's stinky man deserves not to find a wife." Zhang Xuning almost died of anger. She was anxious and annoyed, but looking at the wine-stained jimpsa in Siawei's hand, she couldn't help but be stunned. After a stalemate for a long time, he said, "I can come by myself. At least it's not so dark." Siawei stared at her for a moment, and finally reached out and handed the brocade handkerchief. Zhang Xuning took it, but she still didn't dare to do it for a long time. Siawei said lightly, "Are you going to spend the night in my mansion?" When Zhang Xuning heard this, her heart was half gray, and she simply put her courage down, and gently covered the wine-stained brocade with wine as if this hand was not her own. It's a bit prepared to do it yourself, and the pain is painful, but you can still bear it by gritting your teeth. Just when the blood stains on that scratch were cleaned up, her whole body seemed to collapse. In the end, it was Siawei who came to put ointment on her. At this time, Zhang Xuning was inevitably in a trance. In the last life, before there was no accident and no rebellion, Siawei in the eyes of the world was a saint, a sage, so that people can't find faults, Even if everyone can't really get close to him, they are willing to say a few more words to him. It's so perfect that it's a little unreal. Something happened, he rebelled, and Siawei in the eyes of the world went from one extreme to the other, becoming a thief and a traitor in everyone's mouth, a jackal with ambition, and a traitor with a holy name. It's too dirty, and it seems to be a little biased. Before she came back from rebirth, she thought it was the latter. After returning from rebirth, I was a little uncertain. It doesn't seem to be like this or that, it's really like a mystery. But what does it have to do with her? The matter of the Yanji Marquis mansion has come out, and then we will wait for a result. Good or bad, it should be the end. She just wants to pack her bags, leave the bustling place of the capital, and go to live a leisurely life that she has never had in her previous life. Jiang Xuning was distracted. Siawei found out when he finished giving her the ointment, and pulled her back to her thoughts in a faint voice. Cats and dogs are such animals who don't understand human feelings, they are raised in other people's homes, but the ferocity is inherently difficult to get rid of. Don't get too close in the future. Jiang Xuning raised her eyes to look at him. After a little thought, I knew that Siawei's attitude towards her had changed again, probably because of the cat under the corridor before, right? She was silent for a long time, as if she was considering something. Finally, he said, Bao Ying helped me with something, and she happened to come back that day, so I gave her half of the peach slice cake given by my husband. Siawei turned his back to Jiang Xuning, paused with the hand that put the ointment jar back into the box, and then said, Got it? Faintly, no emotion could be heard in the voice. Jiang Xuning felt that what she should have said seemed to be finished, so she slowly lowered the sleeves of her clothes that had just been rolled up, got up and said goodbye, but when she was about to leave, she remembered the long road ahead without knowing the direction, and her footsteps couldn't help but stop. She seemed to have mustered up enough courage to stop the trembling, turned around and asked, Does the gentleman still want to kill me now? Siawei had just closed the box, and at this moment, it seemed that something else was locked into the box. He looked back, and there was a deep darkness in his eyes. For a while, he seemed to be a little tired, and said, There were so many words that day, did you only remember that I said that I was going to kill you? Jiang Xuning was stunned. Her mind was in a mess, she couldn't figure out what she was thinking, and she tried to remember what Siawei said at that time. But Siawei had already waved his hand and said, Go back to the palace. After speaking, he called again, Sword book, send her out.